Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we are going to zero in on, I think, a pretty crucial aspect of the psychology profession, and that is the actions that the California Board of Psychology can take regarding licenses and applications.
hmm
And we have got uh, quite a range of sources here that lay out all kinds of different scenarios, from minor oversights to serious breaches and all the different ways the board can respond.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look, I think, at not just the legal framework,
Right.
but really about how the profession polices itself
Right.
to ensure public protection.
Yeah. And I think, our mission today in this deep dive is to sort of clarify, the whole spectrum of actions
Yeah,
that are available to the board, the reasons behind them, and what are the key factors, that they're considering when they take these actions.
right. And by the time we're done with this,
Yeah.
you should have a really good understanding of how accountability works in the
Look at
field of
this. I know.
psychology.
All right, so let's kind of unpack this. Starting with those situations that involve um, less severe issues.
hmm
uh, our sources differentiate between what are termed non-disciplinary actions and disciplinary actions.
Yeah.
So starting with non-disciplinary actions, those are sort of for those less serious violations.
Yeah, and what's interesting to note about these non-disciplinary actions is that they often occur
Right.
behind the scenes, so to speak.
Right.
If the Wabaya board identifies a minor issue, for example, um, a lack of clarity in record keeping,
Mm-hmm.
they might issue a confidential letter of warning,
Okay.
or they might require the psychologist to undergo a confidential educational review
Yeah.
to refresh their understanding of a specific area.
Right.
So the aim here isn't formal punishment.
Yeah.
It's more of a course correction, making sure
Mhm.
that folks are following best practices.
So it's about addressing things privately, but still making sure that the right ways of doing things are followed.
Exactly, exactly.
Now, I understand that some of the non-disciplinary actions do become public.
That's right.
Oh,
Citations and fines are also considered
yeah.
non-disciplinary,
Okay.
but these are matters of public record.
Okay.
So even though it might be a less severe issue, uh, there's some thought to um, ensuring a degree of public awareness
Right.
and again, reinforcing that accountability within the profession.
So it's almost like a sliding scale, even within that category
Yeah,
of non-disciplinary actions, where it's like, you know, the least severe thing might be a letter or,
right.
some sort of course correction.
Exactly.
But then if it's slightly more serious, then it might become a public matter.
Right.
Yeah.
But still not rising to the level of that formal disciplinary action.
Right. Okay. So that's good to know that there's that distinction there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, when we move to the other end of the spectrum, we have disciplinary actions, and these we understand are for those more serious violations and are always public.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are the actions that signal, that there's been a significant failure to meet professional standards or ethical obligations.
Okay.
Um, so, one example is a letter of reprimand,
Mm-hmm.
which is a formal public statement, of the board's disapproval
Right.
of the conduct. And then, of course, you have probation,
Mm-hmm.
which is, a situation where a psychologist can continue to practice,
Yeah.
but under specific conditions
Right.
set by the board.
So it's kind of like you're being watched.
Exactly.
You're being supervised in a more
Mhm.
official way.
Yeah, there's additional scrutiny there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, kind of going even further, you have the actions that really directly impact a psychologist's ability to work.
Right.
Um,
So you're talking about suspension.
Yeah.
So the license is temporarily inactive,
right.
so they can't practice for a defined period of time.
Right.
Surrender means the psychologist voluntarily gives up their license,
Mm-hmm.
and then revocation is the permanent loss of the
Yeah.
license to practice.
Right.
And it's worth knowing that
Yeah.
if license is revoked, suspended, or surrendered,
Mm.
the individual can petition the board for reinstatement,
Oh, okay.
but there's a minimum waiting period of 3 years.
Wow. So, it's not impossible to come back from that,
Right.
but it's
It's a long road.
a big
It's
deal.
a long road.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's really helpful to sort of lay out that range of actions.
Yeah.
Now let's get into what kinds of behavior can trigger these actions.
Okay.
And our sources really highlight unprofessional conduct as a key area.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a pretty detailed list actually of what that entails under Business and Professions Code Section 296. Oh,
Yeah, and what's striking to me about the definition of unprofessional conduct is just how broad it is.
right.
You know, it
Yeah.
really underscores the high ethical and professional bar
Right.
that licensed psychologists are expected to meet.
Yeah, it's not just about, clinical skills, it's about,
Exactly.
your whole way of being in the world.
It was about character. It's
Yeah.
about integrity. It's about
Right.
really upholding the public trust
Right.
in the profession.
Exactly. So some of the things that are included in that definition include, being convicted of a crime that is substantially related to the duties of a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
So, something like fraud or abuse of a patient or having a substance abuse issue that affects their ability to practice safely and competently.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, things like misrepresenting your licensing status.
Yeah.
Pretending to be another licensee or using dishonest tactics, when you're applying for your license or taking the exams.
It's exactly. All those things really speak to the core principles of the profession.
Yeah, like those are pretty clearly against the, the spirit of the profession.
Mm-hmm.
And then it extends to the financial aspects of practice as well.
Yeah.
Things like offering or accepting payment for referring clients.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's clearly a conflict of interest.
Right. It could compromise patient care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be, recommending someone to a particular therapist just because you're getting a kickback.
Right. Or steering them away from someone.
Right.
Because you're not.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really about ensuring that those decisions are made
Right.
in the best interest of the client.
Based on their needs, right? Not on your financial interests.
Exactly.
And then also making false or misleading statements about your services.
Right.
That's clearly unethical.
Yeah. That erodes the public trust.
Yeah. You can't be promising people cures or outcomes that you can't guarantee.
Can't guarantee.
Yeah. And then another really big one is the unauthorized release of confidential patient information.
Absolutely. The cornerstone of therapy is the trust and the privacy
Right.
that clients are entitled to.
Yeah. If you can't trust your therapist to keep your secrets, then
Right.
what's the point?
Then the whole foundation crumbles.
Right, exactly. And then also, gross negligence in your professional practice.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, a significant failure to provide the expected standard of care.
Yeah.
And it's not just your own actions.
Mm-hmm.
If you knowingly help someone else practice psychology unlawfully,
Right.
that can also lead to disciplinary action against your license.
Exactly. You can be
Yeah.
held accountable
Yeah.
for aiding and abetting.
So you can't say, "Oh, I didn't know they weren't licensed."
Right.
If you're actively helping them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a responsibility to ensure that those you're working with
Right.
are operating ethically and legally.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Exactly. It's interesting also that if another state or country
Yeah.
takes disciplinary action against a psychologist for, something similar to what's prohibited in California, that can also be grounds for action here.
Right.
So it's not like you can just,
You can't just hop across state lines
hop across state lines and escape.
and escape consequences.
Yeah. And it shows, that these professional standards are taken seriously
Mm-hmm.
across different jurisdictions.
Yeah, it's not just a California thing.
Right, exactly. Okay, so, and then of course we can't overlook dishonest, corrupt, or fraudulent acts.
Mhm.
These go to the heart of, professional integrity.
Absolutely.
And then there's the incredibly important and sensitive area of sexual misconduct.
Yeah.
And this includes any sexual abuse,
Right.
sexual relationships with a current client or even with a former client within 2 years after therapy has ended, and any other type of sexual misconduct that is substantially related to their professional duties. So that 2-year period after the professional relationship ends is significant.
It is. It is.
It really emphasizes the potential for ongoing power imbalances.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though the therapy has ended, that power dynamic
Right.
can linger.
Yeah, and the need for strict professional boundaries.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then also practicing outside of your established competence,
Mm-hmm.
which makes perfect sense.
Right. You should only be providing services that you are qualified to offer.
Yeah, if you're trained as a, child psychologist, you shouldn't be treating, couples or something.
Exactly. Or using techniques that you're not trained in
Right.
or haven't been properly supervised in.
Exactly. And then this extends to supervision as well.
Yeah.
If you willfully fail to provide accurate verification of a supervisee's experience to the board.
Mm-hmm.
That's also considered unprofessional.
Right. That's a breach of your responsibility as a supervisor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You're essentially vouching for this person.
Exactly.
And then finally, even if individual instances of negligence might not be considered gross,
Right.
repeated acts of negligence can collectively point to a pattern
Yeah.
of inadequate professional practice.
Mm-hmm. It suggests a disregard for those professional standards,
Right.
a lack of attention to detail,
Right.
and that can be very concerning.
Yeah, because it's like if you make one mistake, maybe that's just a mistake.
Right.
But if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, that suggests that there's something more systemic going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a pretty thorough overview, I think, of what constitutes unprofessional conduct under Section 296.
That's great.
But our sources also detail other specific situations that can lead to disciplinary actions that are outlined in different sections of the Business and Professions Code.
Right. So there are specific events that trigger disciplinary action sort of automatically. For example, under Section 2966, if a licensed psychologist is incarcerated after being convicted of a felony, their license is automatically suspended for the duration of their incarceration.
So that's like an immediate consequence.
Exactly.
Regardless of any appeals or anything like that.
All right. It's tied to that serious legal finding.
Right.
And then you have Section 2960.1, which specifically addresses sexual contact with patients or recent former patients.
Right. And this is the one where it's a zero tolerance policy.
It is.
There's no
wiggle room here.
There's no wiggle room.
Yeah. If there's a factual finding that sexual contact occurred, either with a current patient or a former patient within that 2-year window after therapy ended, the board must issue an order of revocation.
Okay.
And the law is very clear that an administrative law judge, the judge who presides over these types of administrative hearings,
cannot stay that revocation.
Right. So even the judge can't say, well, let's wait and see.
Right. It's very clear cut.
It's just automatic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And our sources also cover the ineligibility for licensure or registration for individuals who are registered sex offenders, as outlined in Section 296.4.3.
Right. And I think it's important to note that the intention of this law is to ensure consistency in how sex offender registration impacts licensure, regardless of sexual orientation.
So it's not targeting any particular group.
It's about the act.
It's about the action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there is a specific exception in cases where the individual is no more than 10 years older than the minor involved. And that specific offense would be the only reason they would be required to register.
Okay, so there's a little bit of nuance there.
There is.
But generally speaking,
if you're on the registry, you're not going to be licensed.
Right.
Okay. Another interesting point that came up in our sources is Section 494.5, which deals with outstanding tax obligations. So this isn't directly about professional conduct, but it can still affect a psychologist's license.
Exactly. So if a psychologist appears on the Franchise Tax Board or the State Board of Equalization's list of the top 500 individuals with tax delinquencies exceeding $100,000.
Wow.
The Board of Psychology is mandated to either deny their application or suspend their existing license.
So they're serious about taxes.
They are.
Yeah, okay.
But it's important to note that there is a 90-day period to resolve this by either paying the outstanding taxes or entering into a payment plan with the relevant tax authority.
So it's not like an immediate...
It's not an immediate, you're out.
You're done.
Yeah.
You've got a little bit of time to get your affairs in order.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Now, our sources also highlight some situations where there are special considerations during the licensure process. And this reflects, I think, a recognition that some individuals face unique circumstances.
Exactly.
So, for instance, the board is required to expedite the initial licensure process and offer flexibility for refugees, asylum seekers, and individuals holding special immigrant visas.
Right. This is mandated by Assembly Bill 2113.
Okay. So that seems like a really important measure to, help people who have faced significant hardship to rebuild their lives and use their professional skills.
Is, recognizing that they bring valuable skills and experience.
Right.
And we want to make it easier for them.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also a consideration for military families, right?
There is, yes. Psychologists who are licensed in other states and are spouses or domestic partners of active duty military personnel stationed in California can practice here temporarily for up to 12 months from the date they submit their application or establish residency, whichever comes first. While their California license application is being processed.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense considering, the frequent relocations and the other challenges that military families face.
Exactly.
Yeah, you don't want to have to, relicense every time you move.
Right.
Right.
It's about recognizing the unique situation.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Now let's shift gears a little bit and focus on denial of applications.
Okay.
And particularly when it comes to an applicant's criminal history, there are some key limitations on when the board can deny an application based on this.
Right. So first and foremost, the board cannot deny an application solely because of an arrest that did not result in a conviction.
Right. So it has to be an actual, finding of guilt.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And furthermore, even if there are convictions, there are restrictions.
Okay.
The crime must be substantially related to the qualifications, functions, or duties of a psychologist.
Okay.
And it generally must have occurred within the 7 years immediately preceding the application date.
Okay.
Now, there are exceptions for more serious felonies.
Right.
But even in those cases, if the applicant has received a certificate of rehabilitation, which is a legal recognition that they have been rehabilitated or been granted clemency or a pardon, or if the conviction has been legally dismissed, that conviction alone cannot be the reason for denial.
Okay, so there's quite a bit of nuance there.
There is.
And how does the board determine if a crime is substantially related?
Right. So they'll take into account things like the nature and seriousness of the offense, how much time has passed since it occurred.
Right. And the specific responsibilities and duties that a licensed psychologist holds. They'll also consider whether the applicant completed their criminal sentence, including any parole or probation, without any violations.
So they're really looking at the whole picture.
Yeah,
not just the charge itself, but what happened afterwards and how the person has
demonstrated rehabilitated
themselves. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's important to note also that if the board does decide to deny an application based on an applicant's conviction history, the applicant has the right to appeal that decision.
They do. And the board is required to provide them with information on how to do so.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So there is due process there.
Absolutely.
Okay. Our sources also go into some detail about record conviction and expungement relief, which can have a big impact on licensure eligibility.
It can, and I think this is a really important area for understanding how the legal system considers past offenses over time.
Right.
So California law provides for automatic arrest, record relief in cases of arrests for felonies that are punishable by a term in state prison.
Okay.
There's also automatic conviction relief for certain felony convictions that were completed after January 1st, 2005.
Okay.
Where the individual did not receive probation or successfully completed any probation without it being revoked.
Okay.
This excludes serious and violent felonies, as well as offenses that require sex offender registration. Additionally, the possibility of discretionary expungement, where a court can order a conviction to be dismissed, has been expanded to include felonies, where a state prison sentence was imposed.
So it sounds like the legal framework is evolving.
It is.
To offer pathways for individuals to move forward from past mistakes.
Exactly. Yeah. And this connects to the concept of sealed records as well.
Right. Because if a record is sealed, does that mean that the board can't even, find out about it or consider it?
Well, so while the board can ask applicants about their criminal history to evaluate their rehabilitation, they have to inform the applicant that providing this information is voluntary.
Okay.
And the applicant cannot be penalized for choosing not to disclose it.
Okay.
Crucially, the California Department of Justice is required to seal certain arrest and conviction records. When records are sealed, the Board of Psychology cannot access them.
Okay.
And cannot use them as a basis for denying a license.
So that's a pretty significant protection.
It is. It is recognizing
that those records have been legally sealed.
Yeah, people can change.
Right.
People can rehabilitate themselves.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't hold those past mistakes against them forever.
Exactly. Yeah. So in the case of sealed arrests, law enforcement records will indicate arrest relief granted, but this information won't be disclosed to the board.
Exactly.
Okay. So what are the specific conditions for a conviction record to be automatically sealed?
All right. So for a conviction to be automatically sealed, several criteria have to be met. The offense cannot have required sex offender registration.
Okay.
And the individual must not have any current active supervision, whether it's local, state, or federal.
Right.
Nor can they be currently serving a sentence or have any pending criminal charges.
Okay.
The conviction also must not have resulted in the sentence of state prison and must have occurred on or after January 1st, 2021.
Okay.
And finally, the individual must have either completed probation without any revocations, or if they were convicted of a misdemeanor or an infraction without probation, they must have completed their sentence. And at least 1 year must have passed since the date of the judgment.
Okay. And what about the criteria for sealing arrest records?
Okay, so if an arrest occurred on or after January 1st, 2021, it could be sealed under a few different circumstances.
Okay.
These include a misdemeanor arrest where the charges were subsequently dismissed, a misdemeanor arrest where no legal proceedings were ever initiated,
okay,
and at least 1 year has passed since the arrest without a conviction.
Right.
An arrest for a felony where no legal proceedings were initiated, and at least 3 years have passed since the arrest without a conviction.
Right.
And also, if the individual successfully completed certain diversion programs, such as pre-filing diversion or drug diversion.
Okay, so those are all situations where, you know, the arrest didn't really lead to anything.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
So what does all of this mean for someone who is applying for a psychology license or renewing their license and has sealed records?
So applicants whose arrest and conviction records have been sealed are legally considered to be released from any penalties or disabilities that resulted from that arrest or conviction.
Right.
Therefore, they can answer questions from the board accordingly, as if those events had not occurred.
So they don't have to volunteer that information?
They don't have to volunteer it.
Okay.
However, when it comes to renewing a license, there are still certain things that must be reported to the board.
Okay.
These include any pleas of guilty or no contest, or any convictions for misdemeanors or felonies that have occurred since the last renewal.
Right.
Any traffic infractions involving drugs or alcohol, any other infractions that resulted in fines of $500 or more, and any disciplinary actions taken against any professional license they hold, such as suspension, revocation, voluntary surrender probation, or reprimand.
But there's still an expectation of transparency
regarding, more recent
or more significant
issues, even if older records have been sealed.
Right. It's a balance, I think, between acknowledging that individuals can move forward from past mistakes, and ensuring that the board has the necessary information to assess an applicant's current fitness to practice.
Right, because those more recent things might be more relevant to their current ability.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been a really thorough exploration, I think, of the actions the California Board of Psychology can take. And it's clear that there's, a comprehensive range of responses available, tailored to the specific severity and nature of any issues that arise, with careful consideration given to criminal history and other unique circumstances.
Exactly.
So for our listener, the key takeaway, I think, is that the board has a structured system in place
to address everything from minor administrative oversights to serious breaches of professional conduct.
Absolutely. And these actions, particularly the disciplinary ones,
Mm-hmm.
are intended to be transparent,
Right.
to maintain public trust and ensure consumer protection.
Right. It's not just about punishing the psychologists. It's
Uh-huh.
about, making sure that the public feels confident in the profession.
Exactly.
And the regulations concerning criminal history also reflect a thoughtful approach.
Yeah.
Taking into account the nature of offenses, the time that has passed, and evidence of rehabilitation.
It's about giving people a second chance.
Yeah, exactly.
When appropriate.
So given all of this, this detailed framework that we've been talking about, what does this tell you about, the importance and the accountability that's expected of licensed psychologists?
It tells me that this is a profession that takes its responsibilities very seriously.
Right.
They're entrusted with people's mental health, with their well-being, with very sensitive information.
Yeah.
And so there's a high level of accountability that goes along with that.
And what broader questions does this raise for you about the way professional standards are maintained and enforced in other fields?
It makes you think about, are other professions holding themselves to the same high standards? Are they doing enough to protect the public?
Yeah. Are they as transparent?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's certainly something to consider.
It is.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.